piece of the country. Marc couldn't even explain how it all happened.
And no crowds.
Yes, the Holy Spirit was really at work to get you to come here. So our book club has been meeting once a week on Fridays to discuss your book. And it has brought so much fruit to this campus and so much spirit and so much life and wanting to give back more. And we've started with a few questions so that we can be thoughtful of your time. So we're going to go by our list here. And the first question is that I had is, what is the number one need right now for Mary's Meals?
I always start with prayer when people ask me what's the most important thing. And the truth is, there isn't just one thing, because the beauty of Mary's Meals is people can get involved and support this mission in many different ways. Not everyone has to do it the same way. There are many people who take part in our mission who aren't people of prayer, and that's fine. But if someone was to ask me where to begin, or the first thing, I would say that, because I think I think Mary's Meals is a fruit of prayer, and not just in the sense that when it began back then it was a fruit of prayer. It's a fruit of prayer every day.
Well, that's what we've been doing for you, so we're going to give this to you.
Thank you.
And we've been, as a book club, we've been saying the Mother Teresa Novena.
Wow.
So
thank you so much, all of you. Really, thank you. God bless
praying
you.
for you each day.
Thank you.
And we'll continue that
Thank you.
so that your work can go on and help
That's amazing.
others.
That means a lot to me. Thank you so much. Really.
Well, it's all started with your little shed. And you still have that same shed.
Yeah.
That is incredible that your family has borne it. And how many years have you been doing this now? I was trying to...
It would be a little over 25 years, I suppose, since the...
25 years. Wow, you must take awesome vitamins.
The shade is a little bit higher at this stage. We need to make sure it doesn't fall over.
I was going to say that might be a little worrisome. But just some of the things that we have done, that I wanted to share with you as a group, is we wanted to give back to our community. Right now on a global sense, we can donate to your charity, but we can also do things to affect change in our own area.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling that's what your family wants to do, is to make sure that people do God's work no matter where they are. Just do something, anything to affect change. So the first thing we wanted to do was start the food pantry back up, and it was funny because when I took it to Andrew, he said, we're talking about this already, so it was already in motion. So I believe they took you to see the room.
So amazing.
Yes, so it started. We're trying to get the logo up. Charlene is working fervently over there, trying to get our internet to work here, but we had a student, Judy's right there. She's our art and graphic designer, but her student worker actually put this together for us, and it's amazing. So that's the first thing that we want to do, is we wanted to get it up and be thoughtful about how it should be done, and do it in the right steps, so that when it goes up, that it'll be sustained, just like Mary's Meals, that it doesn't just get put together and people give for like 2 seconds and then it's done. We want this to be for our students, a helping hand, and have that helping hand continue just like you have, because we have some Pell eligible students that they can just barely make it with tuition, and the smallest food plan is what, 10 meals in a week. Well, if they stay here on campus, that's doesn't cover it. So that's what we wanted to do. And then we talked about starting one initiative in the fall and one initiative in the spring with faculty, staff, and students helping our community. And the first thing we thought of was putting together school supplies and backpacks like you had done in your book, and work with one of our AQ schools in the area, and talk with them this summer, have the faculty and staff donate all summer long, and then put together. Once we talked about it, I talked to one of the professors and said that we may want to think about, it may not be a backpack, but it may, whatever their needs are, they give us a list, we ask for the donations, and then we put it together. We spend a day together, put it all together, and then bring it to their school. So
great.
that's the first initiative that we want to do. So, all right, well, I'm going to turn it over to Judy.
You're going to turn it over to me?
Yes,
That's what I'm
you're
doing.
the next one.
I'm good.
You're the next one for questions.
We did, as we were reading through the book and contemplating the work that you've done and the different obstacles that have occurred and then the ways that you overcame those obstacles, we thought of some questions to ask you of an immediate nature. And the one, I guess I'm kind of a pessimist, but corruption. Are you worried about corruption? That you're in so many places where the government is corrupt or just people in public office are corrupt. Are you concerned at all about that with Mary's Meals and the different work that you've done? And are there steps that you were able to take to keep that from happening?
Sure. No, it's a great question. And yes, absolutely, we're concerned about corruption because we're choosing to, when you choose to work in the world's kind of darkest places, the places where the need is greatest, then almost always they are places where there is corruption, and so that's a daily reality for us at lots of different levels, but in terms of delivering food, buying food, recruiting people locally, all of those things. You have to be aware of that risk of corruption and constantly be striving to put systems and processes in place that safeguard, whether that's financial control systems or stock control systems. All those things have to be very, very robust. But I would say, more fundamentally, I think what's more important in terms of dealing with corruption is those sort of technical things or process things are very important, but I would say more important is our approach of local ownership and empowering people. So even when you think about the food and the risk of food being stolen, and that's a real risk, because when people are very, very hungry and there's food there's a massive temptation. But because our project's locally owned, even the volunteers, the vast majority of the volunteer cooks are our parents, our aunts, our grandmothers. They're not people who are going to take lightly to someone trying to misuse the food that's for their own children. So we can wrap around those other processes, and we do. We have a very robust monitoring process where every school would be visited at least twice a week by our monitors who do stock taking and all. That's really important that we create those very robust systems. But at the heart of it, that local ownership, I would say, is even more important ultimately for safeguarding it.
Okay.
Is that?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes.
Well, first, thank you so much for visiting us and being here with us and sharing your time and your wisdom and this wonderful, incredible, I would say, work of charity and love that you have done. So thank you. And I think that I always wonder, I guess coming from a college, we're always asked to assess, what are you doing, what are your outcomes? So I was thinking, I wonder, are there any assessments that you make either internally or externally for donors or whatever in terms of sort of measuring success? And I say that lightly because when I watched Child 31, which is very impactful, wonderful film, And I thought, my gosh, success is every time a child gets a meal, you know, to me, but maybe in a broader sense,
sure,
you know.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, it's a great question. It's funny, you've just come from a business class where I talked a little bit more about that, 'cause I thought they might be more interested in that. And it's an interesting balance, because you said it very well, because, you know, Mary's Meals is a work of love, you know, and for that reason, there are some things that you can't measure. You know, I think Mother Teresa said that. I love the fact that Navina's Mother Teresa, but I think she said once, you know, intense love doesn't measure, it just gives. So that's a truth, you know, but there are also things that we should, you know, when we can. And that's for two reasons. So we in recent years, we've been carrying out an impact assessment work, quite an ambitious one, looking at the impact of Mary's Meals on school communities and individual children over the last 5 years. And that's been a serious undertaking. It's an independently verified piece of work, because we really want to create a body of evidence that proves the impact. It's not that we're not just telling nice stories and, you know, we can prove it. This does actually work. And so that's interesting, and we're approaching the end of that study, and it's producing amazing data. Someone just asked me where I was going next. I'm actually going to DC in order to present to the World Bank about Mary's Meals, and that's why, because they're very interested in that impact assessment work, and they recognise that when it comes to school meal provision, there's been very little done in that regard in the developing world of really creating a body of evidence of long-term impact. So they're very excited about that. So we do it for that reason, so that we can convince other people about the importance of this, but we also do it maybe more importantly for our own learning, because we want always to be a learning organisation. So we don't want to just become lazy or complacent in our thinking this is great, this model works, fine, let's just keep doing it. We want to keep challenging ourselves about, you know, is it really working? Is there something we could adjust? Can we refine the model in some way to do this even better? So, and again, so much of that is about engaging with those communities that we serve. So even this impact assessment work I'm talking about is mainly in the form of surveys. Most of those adults in those villages never had the possibility to go to school, so it's not about written forms to fill in, it's about sitting down in the playground in the school and conducting a survey. And so we do things like with the pupils as well. I was talking a little bit in the last class, for example, one thing I never thought much about at the beginning of this is the anxiety that hunger causes in children and in parents. Horrendous anxiety, that terror of about, am I going to have anything to eat tomorrow? And that can have such a negative impact on a child's life. So even just very simply, when we go into a school and do these surveys, and they don't know it's Mary's Meals doing the survey, it's not about people saying what they think we want to hear. It's a neutral survey. So you go in and you create a baseline of, do you experience any anxiety about hunger? You know, and that goes from, I can't remember, 60%. You come back a year later after the introduction of Mary's Meals, and it's down to less than 5%. You know, happiness. Are you happy at school? Similar result. You know, so you know, at the beginning of impact assessment work, and with the very good people in our organisation who are fantastic at this stuff, it's not the numbers bit isn't the thing that excites me the most. So I was always a little bit, you know, if someone had said to me at the beginning, this will allow you to measure happiness, I probably wouldn't have believed it. But we kind of have in a way, and it's amazing, you know. So,
that's wonderful.
But just finally, and I hope I haven't gone too long in this, I don't know how many questions there are, but it does remind me of a very beautiful thing. I remember even before we did this more kind of sophisticated kind of impact assessment many years ago, I remember doing a survey like that in a village, and we were trying to understand more fully why these amazing volunteers were giving up their time despite their daily struggle with poverty. It's always so humbling meeting those people. And so we were doing a survey really just trying to dig into that a little bit, why. And I remember this particular morning in a playground asking the core question of our survey, so why do you choose to do this? And I always remember this woman, I can't remember if I say this in the book or not, this woman just said, because we have it in our hearts. And that was it. It was like, what else is there to ask about that?
Yeah. So Excellent. Well, good luck with that and with the
Thank-
World Bank. That's
thank-
great.
thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think I'm next. My name's Nancy. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience in Medjugorje? And there are some people who doubt the veracity of the apparitions. And what would you say to the skeptics? I've been there twice, so I'm very
Sure.
much a believer.
Sure. So, well, actually, just in the last part of that question, I was in Medjugorje recently, and I know a little bit one of the visionaries, and I was at her house, and there was a group there, and someone asked her that question basically, about how to respond to people that don't necessarily believe that this is valid, and she was saying, well, it's not everyone has to believe in this. It's not obligatory, and don't spend lots of time and energy trying to convince someone about whether it's true or not. I think if someone, what I find in my life, partly because of this book and the work of Mary's Meals, many people do ask me about Medjugorje and want to know more, and then I'm happy to tell them. But it's maybe a bit like our faith and evangelization in general. If we try and force it on people, and it's not obligatory to believe in Medjugorje.
Right.
It's just I believe absolutely with all my heart that our Blessed Mother is appearing in Medjugorje and has been doing so since 1981, but not everyone has to believe that. But in terms of my own experience, I went there, as you know from the book, and quite early on in terms of what was happening there, and that was a real blessing because it was before it was a place of international pilgrimage. It's just the same quiet village it was. And to an extent, people were starting to come, but local people. So we were a bit of an oddity there, really, from the outside. But that was a real blessing because, for example, the visionaries just invited us in when they were having their apparitions to be with them during that time. And it's just such a blessing, and so many. I always hesitate when talking about Medjugorje, and I don't actually talk about it that much because I do think there's a thing. I think when those of us receive, a real experience God's grace in a particular way in Medjugorje, understandably, we do come back wanting to tell everyone about it all the time, and sometimes I think we put people off by talking about it all the time. So I don't talk about it that much. But since you've asked me the question, I find it very hard though to put into words most important things about my experience in Medjugorje, because certainly the most important things were things of the heart, things of my experience of God's grace, my experience of Him as a loving Father, my sense of being worthy in His eyes, my sense of that He has a plan for me. I don't know what it is. And I'm not saying that in a particular way about Mary's Meals or anything, because I'm not saying it was some kind of, I had a notion that God was going to do something particular in my life. It wasn't that, but just that, like everyone else, He was really interested in me personally, and He had created me for a reason, and was interested in every detail of my life. So it was that experience that I'm sure we can relate to, whether we believe in Medjugorje or not. But it was a very, very profound experience. It was a life-changing experience. It wasn't just another kind of experience of God. It was something, and the kind of interesting thing, I think one of the interesting things thinking back now was I was there with all my brothers and sister and cousins, and certainly all my immediate family members, my brothers and sisters, had almost exactly the same experience, and it's never left any of us to this day. And I think for us the kind of core message that Our Lady is giving us in Medjugorje is just a very simple invitation to put God in the first place, and that's certainly in terms of the decisions that my mum and dad made later on about turning our place into a Catholic retreat centre and so on. That's what that was. We're going to put God in the first place, and then what will be will be. But that's first, and that's really. So Medjugorje, but in terms of your question, what would you say to people that don't believe? I would say, I can't resist saying that if you haven't been, just go, because it's very hard to describe Medjugorje unless you go, because there's a grace there. And if you go, I go every year, for example, to the youth festival because they ask us to speak there. 60,000 young people from 100 different countries. You can't really explain that.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm up next. My name is Caitlin, and I loved your book and very inspired by your work as well. So one question it provoked for me, you're very clearly a family man. That comes through very strongly in the book, your love for your family, but also this work has required you to spend a lot of time away from your family. So just wondering how you've made your family life work well and how you've involved your children in your work. And then because you are a family man, I feel like I can tack on the second question from my children. We've been talking about your work a lot, and they've been doing chores that raise money for Mary's Meals, and they want to know how you feed a child for $19.50. They know our grocery bills.
And not just them, everyone wants to know that.
Buy in bulk.
Yeah, so I'll do my best. You may need to remind me of the parts of the question, but
Yes.
The part about family and being away from home, that's a reality that this work takes me away from home quite a lot. Although I would say I think there's a perception I'm away from home much more than I actually am, because people tend to see me when I'm away from home rather than when I am. So most of the time I'm at home, vast majority of the time I'm at home. I probably travel 20% of the time or something like that. Probably never travel more than 25% of the time, so we kind of keep an eye on that. I would say, but that's still tough. It's definitely the toughest part of the job. I don't like leaving home, and so that's a hard bit. Tiny sacrifice compared to a lot of sacrifices people are making, but that's a hard bit of the job for me. I don't enjoy that. But then on the other hand, the blessing, in terms of how we deal with that as a family, first of all, I'm really blessed because, as you know from reading the book, I met my wife doing this work. So Julie is equally passionate about this work as I am. So it never, and we've done this quite deliberately as it's gone on with the kids as well. For us as a family, it's not about, Dad's off doing the Mary's Meals thing. It's we are, as a family, doing the Mary's Meals thing. So it might be that Dad's got to go and meet some people somewhere and he's away. But we're all in it. We're all doing it together. So they understand that can be a bit of a sacrifice, and I understand it can be at times a sacrifice. Probably not always a sacrifice. Sometimes when kids are like teenagers, they probably haven't noticed I'm gone this week. But we talk about it, and it's a family thing. And my kids absolutely love Mary's Meals, and I've always been so far. They might change their mind at some point, but they. It's an interesting thing for me because I've always been quite protective of them in that regard, because I feel sorry for them, because everyone that comes to our house or I meet on the street randomly or whatever, in Scotland, Mary's Meals is very well known, so everyone wants to know about Mary's Meals, and so I kind of feel sorry. Or if the kids just meet someone, they get asked about me or about Mary's Meals or whatever, and so I try to protect them from that in the sense that they don't have to. This has been my call in life. They're not expected to devote their lives to me. Maybe God will ask one of them to do something with Mary's Meals, but that's not an expectation. And while I say this is to an extent a sort of family mission, the other way around it isn't. Mary's Meals isn't a family business. We've deliberately created an organisation that we don't have control over. It's a global movement. So if, for example, if one of my children wanted to work for Mary's Meals one day, they would apply for a job just like anyone else, and if they were the best qualified. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it, I would just say, and again, I think this just relates to all of us trying to raise our kids in the faith, is again go back to that thing about God first, but prayer. About for us that's one part of that is very much about daily rosary together when we're at home, about praying together as a family. So that's a big part of how we try to live. So then £19.50, $19.50. Sorry, even. So it's kind of two main things that make that possible. And first of all, just to say that's a global average. So there's a spectrum of less than $10 in Malawi a year, maybe $40 in some of the more expensive countries. So that's a global average. And two big drivers for why it's so low in cost. One would be just the relative low cost of food within some of those countries, especially if you're buying in enormous quantities. And the second part is about that incredible army of volunteers, so 85,000 of them just in Malawi alone, giving up their time as unpaid cooks. So you can imagine how different that cost would be if they were all being paid salaries. It would be a completely different cost. They would be the two main things. You can explain that to your kids.
That on to
Yeah.
them. They'll be very excited.
Leslie?
Okay, so can you tell us how you became a speaker and a writer?
Okay. Never intended to do either of those, especially the speaking part. That would have been the worst possible thing I could have thought of doing with myself when I was younger. And I was saying that to someone earlier today. I think one of the students asked me about something about how maybe it was one student, how gentle God has been, because if at the beginning when I made that decision to do some things, to give up my job and things, that if I'd been aware that was going to involve doing things like this, to be quite honest, or certainly talking to big audiences or doing media things or whatever, I think I would have run away and hidden, because I was very, very shy, and it would have been a really awful thought to have to do a public thing. Just avoided that at all costs. So God definitely does have a sense of humour, and so even in the early days of this, when we first started being asked to do talks about what was happening in Bosnia and so on, I would normally, I think I wrote this in the book, I would normally make an excuse and say I'm busy, I'm driving the truck somewhere in Scotland or whatever, and persuade my wife now or my mum to go and do those talks. And then there came a point where they just weren't available, and I kind of had to do it, and I hated it first few times, and then just gradually grew into it. And today I still get really nervous at times doing particular talks, but I also love it, because what could be better than telling the story of Mary's Meals? Really, what could be better in this world than having the opportunity to do that? And that's why I've developed in it, because I see the joy it brings. I see, even just coming here and hearing some of your stories about about you being inspired to do some different things through hearing the story of Mary's Meals. That's what a beautiful thing. And that leads me on to, you asked why I wrote the book. That's why. So for a while, people were suggesting, why don't you write a book? And I for a few years, I was saying, I don't want to write a book, because I had this kind of I had this kind of fear about it wrongly being thought that this is about me, and the reason I got to a point where I thought, no, I am going to write a book, is just what I've just said, that I just saw more and more how this story of Mary's Meals is actually a really important one. And it's actually not my story. It involves me, involves parts of me and parts of my journey, but this is something God has done, and it's really important that people know about this amazing thing that God has done, and so that's really why I wrote the book, to give glory to God. Then there was a couple of maybe secondary things to that, which would be, well, the obvious, spreading awareness about Mary's Meals to grow our mission would be one of those two other things, but maybe less obviously would be about protecting the organisation, the values, what Mary's Meals is in essence as we grow beyond those of us who founded it. I think recording the truth of how Mary's Meals was born, and how certain events and experiences shaped our way of doing things and our values, I felt was one really important way to try and protect those values and the ethos of Mary's Meals. So that's why I ended up writing the book. And honestly, I loved writing the book. I really loved the experience of writing. It was very good for me, because maybe over the years, because everything just unfolded the way it did in an incredible way, I hadn't spent that much time reflecting on certain things that God had done. And writing the book and putting it all together like that just kind of deepened my sense of gratitude and sense of awe about, because I feel like that about the book, like some other people do that write, it's like, did that really happen? But it did, yeah.
And you're so humble, and
Yeah.
so you're one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people. What did you think when that happened?
It was really funny. The phone rang. Someone phoned me from Time Magazine, and the first thing I said was, You're kidding. I'm not even the most influential person in my family. So that one was particularly ridiculous.
We got about 7 minutes.
You want to ask your question?
I had a question. So, reading the book, you had to trust so much. How do you trust, and what do you keep in mind to help you?
It's not something I find very difficult. And someone mentioned, I think, in the room that they were a pessimist. I'm not. You might figure it out from the book. That's just something. We're different personalities, you know. So I happen to be, in regard to those things, very optimistic. And I think, in terms of trust, and that can sound very glib. I don't find it difficult. I don't mean that as like that in a way about my own virtue in some sense. I mean, I would say maybe that's the case because of the experience I have every day. God has never ever let us down, you know. And again, you know, I'm sure that's one of the themes that hopefully you found in the book is when I said I wrote it to give glory to God, very much in the sense of the providence of God, how He never lets us down. You know, He might not do that in the way we always expect or when we expect it, but He never lets us down when we do this work, and He never will. He never will. And I don't know what that means in terms of, I don't know how Mary's Meals is going to unfold, but it's really interesting. I challenge some of our co-workers or our board is a typical board of a charitable organisation where quite rightly it has accountants on it and people from business backgrounds who are, we need those, absolutely. And I'm sure, you know, if that's your role on a board, you do the role that you should do, which is, are you sure that's wise to make that investment, or can, you know, those due diligent questions about our financial responsibility. But that's an interesting journey because they're doing what they should do on the board, and I'm coming from a place of, well, actually Mary's Meals, based on all our experience and what we say about ourselves, we should be making decisions in a slightly different way than other organisations if we really believe that much in God's providence. So that doesn't mean that removes all debate and difficult decisions. It doesn't. They happen every day, you know. But even things like, if you think about reserves, you know, financial reserves, how much we keep in the bank in case something goes wrong. You know, that's influenced by our trust in divine providence. We do have, and it's not like we're being irresponsible, we don't have reserves, but at the end of the day, we feel the best kind of reserves that we can have is food in the belly of a hungry child. What's the point in keeping back a load of money for something that might happen in the future when actually the reality today is that kid's hungry and waiting for it. So it does, you know, I think we need to be careful as an organisation that we don't talk about certain things like divine providence and it doesn't connect to how we're actually making our decisions day to day. Sorry, I probably didn't really answer your question there. But, yeah.